Hi, AP Scholars. Welcome to the final day before a 4-day spring break weekend. Before you turn on your relaxation mode, please follow along with today's learning activities using this video, in which we'll be discussing effective introductions and conclusions for the argument essay prompt. Before we get started, I'm going to give you a chance to gather your materials. You should locate in today's Schoology page the student sample page. On that student sample page, you'll find the prompt that we'll be working with today, and also a sample student introduction and a sample student conclusion for the same essay. You may also wish to locate your own argument essay response to the Frederick Douglass passage about education. Ultimately, today you will be asked to revise your own introduction paragraphs and paragraph and conclusion paragraph, and so you may just want to know where your argument response is and have that ready to go. So if you need to pause the video here to gather your materials, you may go ahead and do so. Okay, so the skill we're focusing on today from the AP Language and Composition course and exam description reads, write introductions and conclusions appropriate to the purpose and context of the rhetorical situation. For our argument essay, we keep in mind that our rhetorical situation is that we are writing an argument essay for the AP exam. Our subject is really the subject matter or the topic of the actual prompt. Our purpose is to craft a strong argument that explores the complexities and tensions of the topic. We are the writers, and so we want to think about the rhetorical strategies that we are going to employ to carry out effectively that argument. And our readers are the first line of readers, or our first audience is the readers for the exam. Are the readers for the exam, but you can also think about your audience in this case as a broader audience that would be interested in or might need to know something more specific about the particular topic that you are arguing about or discussing in your essay response. So our essential question for today is, how do I craft a strong introduction and conclusion for the argument essay prompt? Before we go any further, of course, I want to remind you of our scoring rubric and the language of that scoring rubric. So I don't have row A shown here, but I am going to remind you that a thesis or an essay, an effective essay, always includes a thesis that responds to the prompt and that is presents a defensible position. So that is the case no matter whether you are writing a argument prompt response or a synthesis prompt response or a rhetorical analysis response. Nowhere on the scoring rubrics does it actually talk about strong introductions and conclusions, but I would point you back to, of course, row C, the sophistication row, and I would point out for you the language under the decision rules and scoring notes. And I'll just read with you. It says, responses that earn this point may demonstrate sophistication of thought and or complex understanding of a rhetorical situation by doing any of the following. And this is what we need to keep in mind when it comes to especially introductions, but also conclusions. Crafting a nuanced argument by consistently identifying and exploring complexities or tensions. We've been talking about creating or crafting thesis statements that include qualifiers that set you up to more effectively explore those complexities and tensions. And so, again, your thesis statement and your introduction can have a powerful impact on your ability then to explore those complexities and tensions further within the body of your response. They also articulate the implications or limitations of an argument, either your own argument or an argument that is related to the prompt, by situating it within a broader context. And to me, I think that this is where your conclusion might come in and might provide you the nice opportunity to situate your argument or the topic or subject of the prompt itself within a broader context. So we'll keep this language in mind from the rubric as we explore some tips and tricks for creating effective introduction paragraphs. So I'm going to give you an introduction roadmap that is a more formulaic approach to writing an effective introduction. But even when we hear the word formulaic, we sometimes tend to have negative connotations surrounding that term. In this case, I think that a formulaic approach can actually be really effective for an introduction. One quick thing to discuss before I give you some of these tricks or this formulaic approach for introductions is the idea that, going back to the rubric, there's nowhere on the rubric that actually says you need to have an introduction. So if you find yourself in the position where you're running out of time on your argument essay or your synthesis essay, you may want to just begin with your thesis only. So you establish that thesis. Hopefully it's a nuanced thesis that includes a qualifier, so that will therefore set you up to create a more nuanced argument from there. And begin with your thesis only, and then go into your actual argument, your actual body of your response, and only if you have time, return and write an introduction. Again, an introduction can really help you, a strong introduction can really help you achieve that sophistication point, but it's not necessarily necessary. However, a strong thesis and a nuanced thesis really is necessary, especially to get that thesis point. So you want to make sure that you're setting yourself up to craft a strong argument by at least having a strong thesis statement as your introduction, so to speak. An effective approach for a strong introduction can start with a creative concept or an original opening. So this is when you have the opportunity to kind of take the topic and make it your own. Think about, once again, your rhetorical situation. Think about the broader context or implications of the argument itself. And think about a way into this topic, a way into your thesis statement. So typically, many of you have heard about the funnel method for introductions. You start with something more broad, and you kind of funnel your way more specifically to the thesis statement. That's a pretty generally accepted approach for introductions at this point, and it works pretty well. So you might want to think about contextualizing the conversation or contextualizing the topic within a broader conversation, or thinking about a specific way that you can introduce this topic or this idea that might stand out to a reader but still become relevant or be relevant. It should connect, but that connection may not always be immediately apparent. And so as long as it ultimately connects and you can clearly show that connection or clarify that connection as you're going, then even if it seems a little out there at first, as long as to pull your reader in, as long as you your readers ultimately understand its relevancy, then you might want to experiment with approaches like that. From there, you would want to create a bridge, what I would call a bridge. And this includes using the language of the prompt to transition from your concept and connect it to the topic and your argument. And you'll see an example of that once we jump into the examples. You also then would want to end the first paragraph with a clear, defensible position on the topic in the form of your thesis, and that thesis should, as we've been talking about in class the last few days, include a qualifier to create a more nuanced approach to this argument. Similarly, I'd like to provide you with a conclusion roadmap or some tips and tricks that might work for you for a more formulaic approach for the conclusion. Once again, I would recommend that if you are running out of time or if you're struggling with the response, I would suggest that one sentence can suffice. So you might not necessarily have the time to create an entire conclusion paragraph. And in that case, you might just want to think about the bigger idea. So what's the last idea or the last impression that you want to leave your reader with about your thoughts about the topic that you've been presented with? And if you can get that in the time that you have, that sometimes can suffice. That is only if you're running out of time or struggling. In any other case, if you have the time, I would certainly recommend, as with the introduction, that you write a strong conclusion in order to bring your essay to a close that is both stylistically interesting and also relevant and appropriate to the content. Once again, I would have you return to the creative concept or the original opening that you started your essay with. This full circle approach reveals forethought on the part of the writer. It also provides a certain element of cohesion to your essay, and it also speaks to that sophistication point for both of those reasons, that it reveals the forethought on the writer's part, and it also provides cohesion in your argument and your line of reasoning. And it can be a nod to your idea. It doesn't necessarily even have to be this broad expansion of your original idea or your first creative concept. It could just be even one word that is a nod to that original idea, or a phrase that you're coming back to, just to kind of remind your reader where they began your essay and where you began your argument and your line of reasoning. And just like we had with the introduction, I would suggest that you include a bridge, and this time you're not necessarily bridging from your creative concept or your original opening to your thesis statement, but rather you're creating a bridge for your reader out of your essay. So how do you take your reader from the argument that you've been crafting back into the real world? And again, this might take you back to this big idea. What is the broader relevancy or application of this topic or this subject that your reader could take with you beyond just the parameters of your essay? In other words, how might they be able to apply the knowledge or understanding from your argument beyond just this prompt? You can, in this moment, acknowledge that there may be more to explore. This might be an area where, once again, you continue to address those tensions or complexities of the issue, particularly those complexities and the implications of this issue. So you might suggest to your reader, while I haven't covered everything in the scope of this essay, or I haven't been able to address this particular aspect of this topic or this subject, this is also something that maybe we need to think about going forward. So again, it kind of leads your reader out of the essay and back into the real world. At this time, I'm going to stop this video, and I'll have you pick up with the next video to look at the student sample. So you can go ahead then and close this, and we'll pick up by looking at the prompt and the student samples in the next video, keeping all that we've discussed in this particular section of the instructional video in mind as we do so.